Right. Okay. So I'm going to talk about dimes to dollars, but we've just released a TV white paper today, so I'm going to kind of mess it up a little bit and show you a couple of pieces of insight from that white paper, because I think it would be of interest to this audience. So a quick bit about us. What do we do? We're a social video ad tech business. We're not a broadcaster, and we're interested in how to make content better, how to make better for your viewers, but also we'll talk a little bit about how potentially that translates into advertising revenue. Just giving a little bit of a sense of our scale, we've run over 200 campaigns for TV networks, and we work with 84% of Ad Age's top 100 brands. And to give you a little sense of our scale, as you can probably see here, lots of people. So in other words, pretty much wherever your consumer is, especially if they're millennials, we're reaching them, so you can see the Comscore data. And even if you don't know who we are, you've probably seen some of our campaigns. If you've seen moonwalking ponies, babies on rollerblades, or in this particular instance, Dove Real Beauty sketches, this is one of our campaigns that we've powered. And I don't know if you know Dove Real Beauty sketches, but it's the most viewed online advert ever. And if you've seen the latest Dove Real Beauty sketches, that's also one of ours. But there's some problems, and which we're hopefully going to talk a little bit about today, and I'm sure you're probably familiar with Kevin Spacey's keynote at Edinburgh Festival, essentially saying, life's getting a lot more difficult. What can we do about it? And this is one of our own. This is sort of led to the white paper that we've just released today, and you can find it on our website. And I know the previous speaker was talking about exactly this thing, this fall in live TV viewership, which is particularly acute when you start talking about millennials. And why they're leaving, some of these problems I'm sure you're going to be familiar with. But in essence, especially from the millennials' perspective, what they want is control. Control over the content, how they view it, when they watch it, what they want to watch. And of course, that's also combined with fragmenting audiences. So just to use the UK as an example, lots of broadcasters, whole ton of cable networks, and lots of different places that millennials can go if they do want to choose to watch content exactly how they want to watch it. And this is also combined with low ad tolerance, specifically amongst millennials who are a control tab generation. They're very, very quick to move on to the next thing if they feel that they're being sold to or sold at. And also, it's a level playing field. The consumer doesn't care, especially a millennial consumer, doesn't care where the content comes from. So masthead TV programming, from their perspective, isn't what it's about. It's about making time for the content that's important to them in their lives. So they don't care if it comes from somebody in a bedroom or from a major broadcaster. To them, it's just down to the quality of the content. So what's the solution? Well, we're going to talk about two. The one which we're talking about here, which is dime to dollars, but also some of the thoughts we've got just freshly out of this white paper about what can you do to increase millennial audiences. And one of the big problems with a millennial audience is they don't tune in to promos. But the kind of flip side to that is that millennials will watch a show, specifically if a promo from it has been shared to them from one of their peer networks. In other words, this is the absolute value of peer-to-peer sharing. Millennials are really fussy about what they watch, but if they know that their friends are tuning in, there's a moment to engage and have a conversation or go and meet with their friends and watch something, that's the power of sharing. But the problem for TV promos, not only are millennials hard to reach and less likely to share them, but what we found in our research is that TV promos are really poorly branded. So if you do get a millennial to watch your promo, as you can see here, compared to average market norms, they find it really hard to know which channel they should be going to watch the content. And also, in terms of what they actually like to share, as you can see here, the thing they actually most like to share is original promos. We also did this pretty similar piece of research for films last year, where we were looking at the correlation between what sort of content they like and the impact on box office success. And we found it was mainly the content that was created specifically to a program, so some kind of stunt or interesting promo that was made specifically for their audience that consumers were watching. And this is the other thing. The irony for me talking to broadcasters, if you guys have absolutely amazing content. But when it comes to the world of social, you're being beaten by some really mundane brands. You might know here, Dove, with Beauty Sketches on the left, as we touched on already, one of the most shared pieces of branded content ever, and the most shared piece of content of last year was Activia, which goes to show that there's some work to be done of finding out what sort of content works with what kind of audience. And the reason we talk about this sharing behavior massively, because what we've seen is that it's not views that most correlate to how many people are going to watch your program, but it's actually shares. So you can see we've done some research looking at most shared content and how closely that relates to actual ratings of that program. So it's really important to think about how social your content is and how likely is your consumers going to share that piece of content. Because, and I think the previous speaker talked about this, which is social discovery is the new EPG, especially for millennial audience. What they're going to watch is really heavily driven by what their peer group are watching and what their peer group are talking about, tweeting about, and having conversations around in their social networks. And what we're showing you here is just this explosion. We've seen, this is taking the most shared piece of content from back in 2006 and rolling the clock forward to 2014. And this is that hockey stick and explosion in sharing behavior. So one of the things that we've been doing is, about 3 years ago, we had so many clients coming to us and saying, what makes content viral? What makes content shareable? Can you predict it? And I know there's been a lot of cynicism in the past about it being possible to do that. So about 2 years ago, we launched a tool called ShareRank. And we've got now 90% accuracy in the UK, 80% in most other marketplaces, on predicting whether a piece of content is going to be shared, or loosely, will it go viral? So we've taken just a couple of the kind of insights out of this about, okay, what is it that makes really highly shareable content? So when you're thinking about what sort of promos you should make and how it might be shared by a millennial audience, it's really important to think about these two things. So the two biggest factors in getting someone excited about your content is a psychological response. Some of the obvious ones would be funny or sexy, but it could be something that's exhilarating, that's amazing, could be inspirational. And then the second piece is social motivation. So once you've made them really feel something about your content, making it socially transferable. In other words, giving them lots of reasons why they might want to share that piece of content on. And we've applied this specifically to a millennial audience to actually understand what emotional triggers or psychological triggers would be most likely to get them to share your content. And these came out as being three main things. So happiness, but you've got to make them feel really happy. Hilarity, probably no surprise, that's funny. And the one on the right, I think, is probably the most unusual one, which is nostalgia, which is probably the biggest trigger or emotional trigger we've seen being used over the last 18 months. This is really strong for this particular millennial audience, partly for the reason is because they're seeing so much of what we would consider to physical, cassette tapes, vinyl, CDs, going to the cloud. So they really, really look for things that are physical or moments they can engage with emotionally with their peer group. So some of our recommendations, if you are thinking about promos and what's going to get millennials to tune into your content, are these four. So make them laugh, we touched them, kind of obvious, but you can't just make them feel happy. It's got real intense happiness, nostalgia, and amazement. But the other thing to think about is this bit is, okay, if I've made them feel something, what sort of reasons are they actually going to take? Give me some logical reasons why they might want to share that particular piece of content on. And we touched on it already. Millennials are absolutely driven when it comes to TV viewing by their peer group, what their peer group are watching, what they're discussing, something they can share together. And millennials share to start a conversation. So you can imagine it's about what's on tonight, what's on at the weekend, what should we watch, and also to be helpful. Have you seen that thing here? What about if we do this? Did you see this? What about that? But also it's about making your content available on millennials' terms. So this is some of the research we looked at about where they're most likely to watch a promo. As you can see, no surprise, mobile being massive on this particular one. And also it's about engaging your consumers on the open web. What this is really showing is this is ComScore data. Too many marketeers that we talk to are completely obsessed by YouTube and Facebook. It's not to say that YouTube and Facebook aren't amazing platforms, but what I am saying is there's a big bad world out there. If you aren't making your content available on the open web, you're probably missing a trick. And no surprise, back to the earlier bit, it's about creating more original promos. Same as in films, same as in broadcast. quite simply, they're looking for you to work a little bit harder and being a little bit more innovative in terms of the content you're taking to them to get them to engage in your content. And there's no point having a free party. So back to that earlier bit, one of the things that came out of the research was that even if they do see your content, in many cases it's poorly branded. So it might be excited about your particular program coming up, they'll find it hard to remember the who's and the where's and hows they could engage that content. And what we're saying is you'd be really thinking carefully about is your player tech working harder for you? So if you are working with a video distribution partner to get your content out, you should be thinking about a number of things to really ensure you're getting maximum value out of your content. So things like, as you can see here, social feed, tune in, showing there's a really strong conversation going around the content, encourage people to tune in. Obviously a calendar app, to make sure it's in their diary. And lastly is customizing your sharing buttons. So you can imagine that a consumer of, a male consumer of Breaking Bad is very likely to share that on different networks than perhaps a female talking about a cookery program, as an example. And also lastly, to think about making absolutely the most out of programmatic. Lots of the advertisers that we're talking to are thinking about things like retargeting. If someone's already watched your show, highly likely going to watch your show again. If they've watched a clip, they've shared a clip, it's highly likely they're going to tune into you next time. And if you're interested in that sort of piece, we've got a lot of research on what it is. What's the special sauce behind making shareable content? So please feel free to either go to our website, download some of our white papers, or please come and speak to me after this. Okay, so this was kind of the other bit we were going to talk about, which is TV dollars to digital dimes. So one of the real big challenges we were saying earlier is that this particular millennial consumer in particular are very, very ad averse. And especially when it comes to taking your content online, it's very easy to suddenly find that you're not getting maximum value out of your content. So this is a really good example that shows how to make best use out of social video. So when you give the consumer the option to engage in your content, when you make your content native, when you give the consumer control over whether they're going to watch it or not, some pretty amazing things happen. There are actually two versions of this piece of Johnny Walker content. One was a 1 minute long, and this is the 6 minute long. And the 6 minute piece of content far, far, far outperformed the 1 minute piece in terms of views and engagement. And the simple reason for that, we gave the consumer the opportunity to click the play that content. They took their conscious decision to watch the content and enjoy it. And what you also find with social video when you get it right is the CPMs are significantly higher. So what I've just taken here, this is US, but it's completely applicable to the UK marketplace. And what you can see with social video, this is sell side, us selling, is the CPMs significantly for social video beat out more traditional forms of video. So what are these formats? So these, what we're talking about here is native ad formats, and I'm sure you've probably heard that phrase bandied about. But what to us that means is formats that put the consumer in control, that give them a choice to engage in your content, share your content, and make your content be what they're enjoying. So just 3 examples of ones that we work with. So in-feed audio muted, this would be to be initiated very similar to the Facebook video experience. So you're thumbing through your news feed, content's there, consumer makes a choice to engage with it. Skippable pre-roll, so this is a programmatic format, so very much like TrueView. So again, giving the consumer the choice whether they're going to click away or enjoy your content. And the last piece, which the Johnny Walker one was used for, which is, I would say, the classic format for social video, which is putting your content contextually in the right place for a consumer to make that decision to click on that piece of content. And then what we're also doing, and I think this is pretty unique to us, but I know there are lots of brands talking about it, is if you know the triggers of your content and you know how people are going to react to it, you know that, for example, it's a particularly nostalgic piece of content, and you know audiences that really, really who really, really enjoy nostalgic content, getting that sort of promo in front of that sort of audience will do a couple of different things. Firstly, it will give you a lot of media. It's free stuff because people will share it and talk about it and tweet it. Secondly, it's much more memorable because people enjoy that kind of content, tend to remember it much better. And 3, people are much more likely to act on it. So we found that when you get the content in the right place with the right person, they act on it. This is the other thing to think about, which is this is called the social diffusion curve, and what is essentially showing that increasingly pieces of video content are becoming like news stories. Your moment in the sun, as you can see, in 2013, all the talk and conversation around a piece of content happened in, or 22% of it happened in the first 3 days. Now, that peak, that Internet of Things, either getting involved with your content or moving on, is becoming even sharper. So if you are thinking about getting the maximum value out of your content, this is really telling you to go big or go home. Back to this bit. So this is the actual research where she's talking to YouTube. And this is ComScore data. And I don't... Hold on just for a minute. Okay. What this is showing is year on year, YouTube's share of market or total views is beginning to drop. And there are a number of different reasons for that, Facebook video being obvious, but also because, especially from a millennial consumer, there are lots and lots of other places available to them for them to share and engage in content. So a big kind of trend we're seeing is, probably everyone here knows that Facebook has is a great place to share to your broader group of friends. But when you're having a conversation, if you're a millennial, and you're having a conversation of what you're going to do now, what you're going to do tomorrow, and what you're going to do at the weekend, those conversations are increasingly happening off the Facebook environment, which is why, I'm just going to flick on to the next one, is to think about all the different new platforms that are exploding, where especially a millennial consumer are beginning to have conversations about your programs and about your content. So you should be thinking about how you're engaging with all of these different operations to build out your own platforms. Otherwise, I think the gentleman was on before was saying, you don't want to build yourself a subscription based on someone else's platform. Okay, that's it. Questions, if there are any.
Any questions for Dan? I have one which is just to be awkward, and I'm sure you've heard this before, but one of the earlier speakers raised this, but you were focusing very much on, there's some really interesting insights on how millennials are engaging with video content and the kind of tactics that advertisers and content owners have to kind of employ to engage them across different platforms and so on. It's an obvious point, someone else made it and I'll make it again, but are we too obsessed with engaging millennial audiences when the 50-plus audience in every country is bigger numerically, has more money, they're loyal to brands, they have more disposable income, and they watch more TV? I mean, I know that's a sort of wider point, but what would you say to that?
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, loosely, it's not always about the millennials, is it? But I think it's most... Well, let's say it's the strongest trend amongst that younger age group. But what I think is absolutely happening is the battle to get consumers watching your content is going to become increasingly hard. So there's a phrase that's well known, it's called content shock. And so I'm not a millennial, you probably guess. And if I think about me, I call it the Twitter effect. So I use Twitter for all of my business content. Don't use it for anything personal. And when I first started following Twitter, I probably followed 50 people, brands, whatever, and I could just about manage that content. Now I've got 750 people on my Twitter feed. Absolutely impossible to follow it all. So the battle to get consumers to tune in just for your content, I think is going to become increasingly hard. And that's why I think it's important to, one, make sure, what's right for millennials. All the lessons we've got here about what makes great shareable content, you can apply to any audience. I've just kind of focused on that because we've got a white paper that's out at the moment. And second, finding ways to monetize your content in an offline world, I think it's becoming increasingly important. So the gentleman before, we work with TV Thai, so we do exactly the same thing. So you've got your broadcast ad playing on TV, and then whichever consumer it is, I mean, if I look around now, most people are second screening during most of the programs, and the ability to simply do lots of interesting things and target that consumer, I think it's going to be incredibly important. It's going to be about getting the content right time, right place.
Thank you. And incidentally, I don't disagree with that at all. I think we're furious agreement here, but certainly our clients all want to know about how to engage younger audiences, because that's, those are the trend. That's the way for the future of capturing them, and that's they're really elusive at the moment. So thanks for your insight. So thank you to Dan.